Hello everybody, how are you all doing? Thanks for being here. Hey, I'm going to do a response video right now. This is for Joe, Mr Mayo. He recently did a video where he was asking everybody, what generation Beatles fan do you consider yourself to be? And it didn't take me long to think about that because, as a matter of fact, I've known Joe for a little over 3 years now since joining this community, and he and I have both spoken about this a little bit. And I have to say that our situation kind of runs very parallel in the sense that we both consider ourselves first generation Beatles fans. And I'm going to tell you why I consider myself a first generation fan right now. I'm a little older than Joe. As he mentioned in his video, he was born in '62. I was born in 1961. So I've got another year on him as far as being aware of what was going on in my life and what my surroundings. And I have some vivid memories, and God, I've spoken about this in so many of my videos, about how back in 1964, the early part of 1964, when I was 3 years old, my parents bought me Meet the Beatles and A Hard Day's Night. I've spoken about this in so many videos. You know the story if you've watched for a while. And they bought me these two albums, and they had a little old hi-fi stereo. It had four, I remember the thing vividly. We lived in a second floor apartment in Providence, Rhode Island, right after they first got married. And they had this little hi-fi system with four wooden legs on it. And on top of the legs, or what the legs were screwed into, was this large, like square wooden box, and the top opened up and you put your records down on it and it played hi-fi. It had like one speaker or something like that. And I remember them taking these two albums and putting them on for me as I bounced up and down on my little toy hobby horse. And I've demonstrated it before in past videos, so why not again? Used to bounce up and down on that horse to these two albums and loved every bit of it. My father even said at one point that especially the Hard Day's Night album, he thinks I wore this one out, which if you saw one of my last videos, I showed you my original vinyl of this. It is pretty worn out. So I do remember that little box stereo, and I certainly remember songs like I Want to Hold Your Hand, where that was the big thing at the time, and I remember loving this one when it came on, when Meet the Beatles was played. And my dad said that one of my favorite songs was the actual song A Hard Day's Night, which came from this album. And they said, that was one of my favorites. In 1964, I do have vivid memories of that time period. Just like Joe said in his video, it's funny, as you get older, things that are happening now, like I can't remember if you asked me something I did 3 weeks ago, but you asked me something from back when I was a little kid, and I can bring that memory forward and very vivid and very, very detailed. And I remember also that year being taken to the Mary Poppins movie by my parents. They took me to see Mary Poppins, and this had a huge impact on my life as far as the visuals, the color, the music scenes, the dance scenes had a big impact, almost as big as the Beatles had on my life, certainly. But this, just to show you that memories can be very vivid when you're a little kid of 3 or 4 years old, and I do remember this movie. Now, we saw Mary Poppins, and one of the big things in my family was very close on my mother's side, was going over each other's homes. We used to go over my uncle's house all the time in those early years and hang out, and they'd watch TV together or sports. TV was a big thing at the time, and just have family gatherings with meals and good cheer and whatnot. And I do have a memory of being at my cousin's house in 1964 and seeing the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. I have shadowy images of being in that house, of seeing the Beatles, of remembering the arrows that were surrounding the Beatles during that first appearance. And I do have images of being at my cousin's house, sitting in their living room. They had this big, large TV stereo console at the time. It was very long and made of wood. It had two speakers, one on each side. You slid a doorway to get to see a small TV. And then on this side of the TV, if you opened the top, was a little record player. And I believe it also had like an AM dial on it. I don't know if they had FM on it, but I remember an AM dial. And my three cousins were a little older than I, so they were right in the thick of Beatlemania and the Beatles. And so they were going ballistic, buying Beatles stuff and buying the records and listening. So naturally, with my parents buying me Beatle albums and listening to them as a little boy, and my cousins being involved in it, it was huge. It was huge. And I remember in '65 when this single came out, my cousin playing this for me. I remember seeing this picture sleeve. It just was very striking to me to see the Beatles not in their suits and ties, but seeing them in their jeans and their t-shirts and whatnot. And I just remember them playing this single for me and being blown away by both sides of it. The rocking nature of I'm Down and just Help as a song. I was probably 4 years old at the time, but have vivid memories of my cousins playing this for me and loving it, just thinking it was the greatest thing. And it's like I said, a lot of this stuff, a lot of this music listening in the early days for me centered around my cousin's house at my uncle's. It was my mother's older brother. We would go over there a lot, and they just turned me on to the Beatles, along with my parents buying the records. My cousins played me everything they had, showed me everything they had, sat with me, talked about the Beatles with me, and those memories will just always sit with me forever. And after Mary Poppins, I have a vivid memory of going to see Help in the theater with my parents. They took me to see it. I remember loving it. I remember being struck again by the color, by the vividness of it, by the sounds and images, the colors, the music. It just knocked me out as that little 4-year-old boy. I have such vivid, fond memories of that. It means so much. Now, my mother's friend also, my mother and father's friend, I should say, and I almost consider them like an aunt and uncle, like unofficial aunt and uncle. I think my mother went to high school with the wife, and they owned a little cafe in Providence, Rhode Island, a little place like right next to where they lived. They ran a little cafe where you could get food, sandwiches, drinks, and whatnot. Well, they had a jukebox in that place. And I remember going in this little place quite frequently whenever we visited my parents' friends at this cafe, going in there, and they had almost every Beatles single from those early days, from like 64 to 66, in this jukebox. And I remember the husband had it set up. He was the one who ran the cafe, where he could do a certain, I don't know how he did it, but he didn't have to put a quarter in. He could hit a button, and he would just say, push the buttons you want. You could play whatever song you wanted, and it didn't cost you anything. I don't know how that works, obviously technological wise, but he would do it. So all I had to do, maybe he did slip a quarter in there and I didn't know it, and I could get 3 plays, who knows. But I thought it was free. I thought he was doing something special where I could listen to the Beatles as much as I wanted for free. So he used to do that, and I remember listening to the music and just loving it. And this little cafe, it's always going to be vivid in my mind, the front of it, what it looked like, the imagery of going inside of it and seeing that lit jukebox and kind of a darker cafe inside, but this jukebox was lit up in the back, and just looking in there and seeing all the Beatles singles and picking them out and playing them. It's just a memory I'll have the rest of my life. Certainly I have memories of the Beatles cartoons. Such fun to see them, and to see them now and remember seeing those episodes back when I was a kid brings back a lot of memories. And I have an even a little better memory of seeing the Beatles a year later, back in, I think it was summer of '65, or it was maybe aired in the fall of '65, when they appeared another time for the final live time on the Ed Sullivan Show in '65. I have vivid memories of seeing that show with my cousins, with my parents, my aunt and uncle, over at their house again, had to watch the Beatles. Such good memories. And let me go another further with '65 here, because I do have vivid memories of hearing this single on the radio as a little kid. And I remember being over my cousin's house again and seeing this single, because again, the colorfulness of it, the vivid image of the Beatles, it just meant so much to me. And here's the back right here. I just love this song, Day Tripper, and I remember Day Tripper a little more than We Can Work It Out, but I just have vivid memories of Day Tripper and loving it. And obviously it was recorded during the sessions for this album, and this album brings back a very vivid memory of me of early 1966, because this came out in late '65. I remember being over my cousin's house, and the younger of the cousins, he's 2 years older than me, I remember him taking this album out and showing it to me and talking about all the songs on it and how great they were and how great the Beatles were when they put out this album. Almost like he knew then or maybe he was being told by his older brothers that the Beatles were advancing and were getting better and more prolific. And he didn't word it that way as a young, whatever he was at the time. I want to say he was probably 7 or 8 years old, but he just had to show me this, and he played it with me, and I love the songs on it, and I love the whole feel of this album. So that brings back very, very fond memories. I also have a vivid memory of 1966 because I was at this time 5 years old and going to kindergarten. And I don't know why, but I have a vivid memory of in the car. My mom used to drive me to the kindergarten, which was the next town over from where we lived. And I remember this song coming on the radio. And I just, paperback writer, and I just remember that I can still picture where I was, what street we were on when I was driving towards the school, and this came on the radio. And I just, that has been burned and printed into my brain for some reason. And so Paperback Writer, the song itself, will always have a special meaning to me. And here's the back of my little thing here. Because it's just such a fond, vivid memory of being in the car with my mom as we were driving to the school and hearing that song. It just, every time I hear that song, it always makes me think of that moment with my mom, who's sadly no longer with us, but just brings back a nice memory. So anyway, folks, that's just a few of my little stories up until about 66 or so. I could go further, but it would take a longer video to talk about the later years and how I got deeper and deeper and deeper into the Beatles, leading up to the 1970s when I became a full-blown Beatle fanatic and Beatle maniac, I guess you want to call it. But those are just some of my early stories. As a nice response to Joe. Joe, thank you for the inspiration on this. I'm happy to talk about it, and I'm happy to say, yes, I am a first-generation Beatles fan. Bless you all. Take care. Bye-bye.